All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jason Bailey. I'm the Executive Director at the Kentucky Center for Policy. We're really glad to have you all with us tonight. Those of you who don't know us, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy research organization. Our work is to improve the quality of life for all Kentuckians. And the purpose of this webinar is to discuss a new report we released today called An Economic Agenda for a Thriving Commonwealth. And you can get a copy of the report if you've not already at our website, which is www.kypolicy.org. So in this webinar, we're going to hear from KCEP colleagues about the ideas laid out in this report. And before I hand it off to them to get into the meat, the substance of what's in it, I want to share a little bit about why we wrote it and at a high level what the report is saying. So there are four things that we believed firmly when we started this project. First, that Kentucky is not thriving like it should. Despite our now low unemployment rate, there aren't enough jobs in all communities, and there certainly aren't enough quality jobs where wages are growing. We face significant challenges ranging from drug addiction to mass incarceration. Public investment in everything from child care to infrastructure to making college affordable has been declining. Inequality is large and growing, and inequities based on race and gender and region and other characteristics keep us apart. Second, the policy ideas that have dominated the debate in Kentucky in the recent years too often make those problems worse by kicking people off health coverage, lowering wages for workers, reducing retirement security for public employees and teachers, and cutting taxes for the wealthy. The dominant formula of what is sometimes called economic development, a trickle-down approach based on making Kentucky as cheap as possible for big corporations, just sets us further back. Third, there's the dearth of alternatives out there in Kentucky about what could be done instead. We have too little debate in our state about ideas that would work to grow a stronger economy, and yet the evidence shows we are not pursuing the policies that have been shown to work in other states. And then fourth, there's not only a lack of ideas, but a lack of bold ideas and leaders that are willing to stick their necks out and take a chance on promoting policies that would make a real difference. Yet, we're in a period where many people are hungry for proposals that could really move the needle and potentially be transformational for people in our communities. So as an organization, KCEP started in 2011, and over the last 7 years, we've built up a body of research and data about the impacts of a wide range of policies and a library of reports. Our goal here was to channel that information into a set of proactive ideas that we think the evidence shows would work. So this report contains 36 different ideas. We're not going to go over all of them today in this webinar, but want to give you a taste of what's in the report. And we hope you and other leaders across Kentucky will consider these ideas, take some up as your own, debate them, and improve upon them. And whether you agree with us or not, have a deeper and more substantive and more visionary conversation about what we could do together to build a commonwealth where all Kentuckians can thrive. So at a high level, what does this report say? Its premise is that the way to build a prosperous Kentucky is to unlock potential in our people and communities. That the way to create a thriving economy is from the bottom up and the middle out. We must see our people in our state as assets and recognize that the healthier, more educated, and more financially secure we are as individuals and communities, the more prosperous we will be as a whole. This report also focuses on what the state can do. The federal government has an absolutely essential role and responsibility in the policies that determine economic conditions on the ground in Kentucky, from the Fed's management of interest rates to national health care policy, the federal budget, immigration, safety net policies, and so much more. There are things it can do that we just can't do at the state level. But the state's role is very important, and states serve as laboratories of democracy to test out ideas that can achieve scale at the national level. Local policies are also important, but are outside the scope of this report we're talking about tonight. So in the report, we outline 5 strategies that we see as a formula for state growth and that work together. And under each, we propose a set of specific ideas. The 5 strategies are, first, improve job quality and economic security so that work pays and supports healthy, fulfilling lives. Families are better able to make ends meet, and workers have more dollars in their pockets to spend in local economies. Second, strengthen education for all Kentuckians, ranging from high-quality early childhood education to affordable higher education, closing gaps in educational opportunity and attainment, and increasing productivity and innovation. Third, build resilient, healthy communities by removing barriers ranging from addiction to incarceration to predatory lending, and increasing access to preventive efforts like primary care, healthy food, and restorative justice programs. Fourth, equip Kentuckians for prosperity in the modern economy by updating an infrastructure that ranges from clean energy to high-speed internet access to repaired roads and bridges. And fifth, clean up the tax code to invest in our Commonwealth by fixing up our upside-down tax system and pursuing other strategies to free up new revenue to pay for the ideas above. So without further ado, we're going to dig into these strategies. I'm going to hand it off to KCEP Communications Director Anna Bowman, who will talk about the first strategy, improving job quality and economic security.
Thanks, Jason. So good jobs are a necessary component of moving our people and our communities forward. Because, of course, when paychecks better reflect the contributions each of us makes to our Commonwealth, and when work builds us up rather than tearing us down, we will be healthier and happier and more prosperous together. Currently, outdated laws hold us back. This graph shows that workers making wages at the 20th and 30th percentile make far too little to meet basic budget needs, too little for one person, let alone a family or two of 4. Our minimum wage, even at full-time year-round work, doesn't keep a family of 2 out of poverty. And we face persistent wage gaps between men and women and whites and people of color. Policy choices keep us struggling, sometimes even against one another, instead of thriving together. But there are ways to make real progress on job quality and economic security for Kentuckians. It's time to give Kentucky workers a raise, to put money in workers' pockets so that they can make ends meet and invest in a brighter future. In order for our minimum wage to once again be a dignified wage for a hard day's work, we should increase it to $15 by 2025 and index it to inflation so that it never erodes again like it has over recent decades. A $15 minimum wage would raise wages for over 600,000 Kentuckians. We should also gradually eliminate the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers who experience higher rates of poverty than non-tipped workers, so that they can earn the same minimum wage as the rest of us. We can also raise wages by repealing so-called right to work, a law that lowers workers' wages by 3.2 percentage points, and by reenacting prevailing wages, which will raise pay for construction workers by as much as 10% and have secondary benefits in our local economies. And we should enact a state-earned income tax credit at 15% of the federal. This highly effective anti-poverty tool would supplement wages in many of the essential but low-wage jobs in our economy. Our working people, black, white, and brown, on their own or supporting families, rural, urban, and regardless of industry, deserve no less. And when workers have money to go out and buy what they need, our entire economy benefits. We can also make needed progress on closing the gender pay gap and race pay gap and supporting healthy families and communities with policies such as paid sick leave and paid family leave. We all get sick, and most of us have family members to care for at times. These facts of life shouldn't keep any of us, including low-income people whose employers are less likely to provide paid leave, from leading healthy, economically secure lives. Same goes for fair scheduling. Workers should know at least 2 weeks in advance when they're scheduled to work. They should be able to decline hours outside of that schedule, for example, so that they can manage necessities outside work like childcare and doctor's appointments. These common sense policies will also help close pay gaps for people who do caregiving on top of their formal employment. Additionally, we can close pay gaps by making sure workers doing different kinds of jobs but requiring the same level of skill and responsibility, jobs that are often segregated by race or gender, making sure those jobs are paid equally. To further support pay equity, employers shouldn't be allowed to ask applicants how much they made in previous jobs, and workers should have more information about firms' compensation practices to help them bargain for fair pay, commensurate with what others make. Other policies that comprise this strategy would increase retirement security for Kentuckians, strengthen unemployment insurance, improve expungement to support second chances, prevent worker misclassification, and make sure that our state only gives tax or other incentives to employers who provide high-quality jobs. Ashley Spalding, our senior policy analyst, is going to talk now about the kind of education we can provide to build a thriving Commonwealth.
Adequately investing in education can help us make progress on all of our goals for the Commonwealth. A good education can increase the economic security and health of individuals and families, and it can strengthen Kentucky's workforce. By investing more in high-quality educational opportunities from early care through higher education, we can achieve the thriving communities we all desire. Unfortunately, inadequate state funding for education holds back our kids' academic success and stifles the state's economic potential. It also increases financial pressure on local sources of funding, which exacerbates the gap between what we invest per pupil in poor and wealthy school districts. When we surveyed Kentucky school districts last year about the impact of funding freezes and cuts, we learned many have had to reduce student services, the number of instructional days, staff, course offerings, and more. And tuition increases at our public universities and community colleges and inadequately funded state financial aid result in steep increases in student debt, price many out of higher education at all, and have led to reduced student supports that are important for degree completion and make it less likely that struggling students will be successful. Here's what we need to do to break down these barriers to shared success from birth through college. Childcare is expensive and can be hard to find. We need to help more working Kentucky families afford quality care by raising the income limit so that more people qualify for child care assistance, as well as increasing provider reimbursement rates. We need to expand preschool and kindergarten for all Kentucky kids by funding full-day preschool for all 4-year-olds up to 200% of the federal poverty line, and funding universal full-day kindergarten. We know from research that high-quality early childhood experiences are hugely important to students' later success. We need to restore funding for supports that promote student success, such as extended school services like tutoring and after-school programs, instructional materials like textbooks, and teacher professional development. Current funding is inadequate, with textbooks and professional development receiving no state funding at all in 2019 and 2020. We need to make an investment of an additional $400 million a year in SEEK, the state's core funding formula for local schools, which is a down payment on the additional funding our districts need to ensure a high-quality education for all Kentucky kids. This funding would begin to restore transportation funding, of which the state has not been paying the full statutory amount, allow for smaller class sizes, and help support additional necessary staff to assist kids who need extra help. We also need to make college affordable by providing 2 years of tuition-free college for all Kentuckians at community college rates. Funding for the state's need-based scholarship, the College Access Program, also needs to be increased so more qualified students can receive it, and scholarship amounts increased so that students can apply these funds to help meet the additional costs of college that can end up being a barrier to completion, such as food, housing, and transportation. Additional funding would also need to be provided to the state's community colleges especially to help fund adequate student support services to encourage degree completion. Our policy analyst, Dustin Pugel, is now going to talk about the kinds of policies that will build healthy and resilient communities across the Commonwealth.
So one vital ingredient of a thriving Kentucky, where economic opportunity can be fully pursued by Kentuckians of all walks of life, is resiliency. And by this I mean that when any Kentuckian is sick or disabled, they can get the care they need. When Kentuckians suffer from addiction, they are rehabilitated. When Kentuckians move through the justice system, they have a pathway toward full restoration to society. and when Kentuckians rent or borrow money, they can do so without it becoming an unnecessary or unforeseen crisis. We all know that being healthy is multifaceted, so these policy goals work together as a blueprint for healthy communities that can bounce back from adversity, like cancer or addiction, eviction or bad debt, all of which plague our community at dangerously high levels. To ensure Kentuckians can get and stay healthy, the state should start by removing the proposed barriers to coverage in the Medicaid waiver, which are estimated to leave at least 100,000 Kentuckians without health insurance. But we should not stop at removing barriers to coverage. We should also move ahead in ensuring that all Kentuckians can afford health care by first offering Medicaid as an option for everyone on the health insurance exchange. By allowing any and all Kentuckians to buy into Medicaid coverage, which is less expensive and covers more than most individual market plans, we can provide another good option in a state where there is currently only one option per county. And as a competitive option, it could also drive down premiums for other plan options. We can further lower premiums, especially for Kentuckians who earn too much for premium assistance but who don't get coverage through work, by creating a reinsurance program which helps offset the cost of insuring patients with especially expensive conditions. Doing this would actually lower premiums and other forms of cost sharing for everyone who purchased coverage on the exchange. We can promote healthy communities too by supporting Kentucky's agricultural development. Stronger local agriculture means fresh, healthy food for Kentuckians who need it through programs like the Senior Farmers Market, Kentucky Double Dollars, summer feeding, and farms to food banks. We can and should do better by our Kentuckians with disabilities. The long waiting lists for community-based care should be shrunk, and we should allow more seniors to receive nursing care in their communities instead of a nursing home. In providing community-based care for those who need it, rather than putting people into nursing homes, the state could actually save money while providing more compassionate care. We also must restore funding for our mental health safety net and provide options for low-income Kentuckians with mental illness to get treatment without being institutionalized. And we should connect people with addiction treatment through more needle exchange sites throughout the Commonwealth, which will reduce the spread of diseases that are life-altering and expensive to treat, like hepatitis C and HIV/AIDS. For Kentuckians who are in the justice system, we need to make sure that the process is fair and provide pathways back into full participation in society. We can safely reduce the unsustainably large prison population and address the racial disparities found throughout the criminal justice system with common sense reforms. We can accomplish these goals by reducing sentences for low level of offenses, including parole violations, repealing the so-called gang bill, and decriminalizing and regulating marijuana. We can steer people toward more constructive means of rehabilitation like restorative justice programs and expand drug, mental health, and veterans courts. And to ensure all of us have access to these options, we should invest in an adequate number of high-quality public defenders and provide them with a much-needed pay increase. Our community should also be free from predatory lending and unfair housing practices that can deepen adversity. Payday lenders can turn a short-term need into a lifelong financial hole, which is why we need to lower and cap their interest rates from 391% to 36%. And depending on where you live in Kentucky, housing standards and eviction processes can vary wildly. We need a uniform standard for renters so that they and their landlords have the same reasonable expectations of housing quality and evictions across the Commonwealth. So now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Zeller, our Outreach Director, who will discuss how we can build and rebuild our infrastructure for the modern world.
Having a modern, well-functioning infrastructure is vital to the health and well-being of our communities and our businesses. Infrastructure includes all the physical, public investments we make to increase access and safety. Investments like clean water systems, affordable electricity, safe roads and bridges, and high-speed internet. But Kentucky has fallen behind in investments in our infrastructure in ways that make life and work more difficult, expensive, and dangerous. Our agenda lays out 5 policy goals that would equip Kentucky for prosperity in the modern economy. Specifically, we could achieve universal, affordable broadband internet access, a necessity in all communities, by completing the Kentucky Wired project in a timely manner and, where feasible, cutting out inappropriate private sector profiteering that was unwisely built into the project. As the high-speed backbone is built out, Kentucky must support affordable last-mile broadband access in our communities. We must also accelerate our transition to clean power by establishing a renewable portfolio standard and expanded energy efficiency measures that will create jobs, improve air and water quality, and create economic benefits from new industries and lower energy use. The safety and economic needs for investing in our roads and bridges are clear. Kentucky has 1,100 structurally deficient bridges and more than 3,700 miles of roads that need significant repairs, plus a backlog of needed pavement improvements that total approximately $100 billion. Delayed maintenance due to inadequate road fund revenue increases the eventual cost of each project. But by making improvements on a responsible timetable, we can put Kentuckians to work, facilitate growth in our economy, increase our safety, and reduce what Kentuckians spend on automobile repair. In addition to investing in our transportation infrastructure, Kentucky needs to invest in our water infrastructure. With an estimated $6.2 billion in drinking water infrastructure needs over the next 20 years, we need to get started. We have an outdated dam infrastructure, we have significant wastewater needs, and we need to improve our water quality through stream protection and restoration. Through increased investments, we could put our people to work on improvements that enhance public health and ecological integrity. So how do we pay for all these infrastructure improvements? Pam is going to talk a little bit about raising revenue in a moment. But we also have an out-of-the-box solution that would help to lower the cost of these improvements. Because infrastructure improvements come at a big initial cost, but provide long-term benefits, government will typically finance construction costs by issuing bonds. It's similar to how most of us can't come up with $200,000 up front to buy a house, so we get a mortgage and pay it off over time. Except instead of the investment being measured in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, these infrastructure investments are in the billions of dollars. So the debt that a state ends up paying in bonds is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Kentucky's lower bond rating exacerbates the cost of debt even more, increasing the interest rates on any bonds that we issue. A state bank, as North Dakota has operated successfully for 100 years, could bring a lot of benefit to our Commonwealth. A state bank could lower the costs of some of the debt issued to finance infrastructure investments and partner with community banks to potentially expand lending options for community infrastructure and businesses. Additionally, a state bank could issue and refinance student loans at competitive rates. All of this would keep more money in the hands of Kentuckians and our local economies, growing economic opportunities here by putting our money to work within our Commonwealth. Plus, once up and running, a state bank could actually send money to the state's general fund, as North Dakota's does every year. Now Pam Thomas, our Senior Policy Fellow, will discuss common sense and much-needed ways to raise revenue for our investments.
You've heard from my colleagues about the policy changes and additional investments that we need to make so that our communities thrive and prosper. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can generate the revenue it will take to make those investments. Taxes are how we all work together to provide the resources we need to grow and prosper. But our current tax code is both upside down, because we ask more from those with less, and inadequate, because our tax revenues have not grown as our economy has grown, forcing round after round of budget cuts and resulting in a lack of critical investments in our schools, communities, and services and infrastructure. As the graph shows, if our general fund hadn't eroded over the last 27 years, we would have had $2.2 billion more in 2018. There are lots of tax breaks that benefit corporations and wealthier individuals that prevent our revenues from keeping up. We need to take common sense steps toward an adequate, sustainable, and equitable tax code. But in 2018, policymakers went the other way. They used a majority of revenues generated from a greater reliance on sales and cigarette taxes to pay for a huge income tax cut for the wealthy and corporations, making our tax system even more upside down than it already was. These changes will also make it much more difficult for revenues to grow the way we need them to because of the shift from the faster-growing income taxes to the slower-growing consumption taxes. So what can we do? Our policy agenda lays out several options, and I'm going to mention just a few. First, the cornerstone of our policy recommendations related to revenue, a set of improvements to our individual income tax. First, we need to shift more reliance back to the faster-growing income tax. To do this, we should set the current flat 5% as our minimum rate for income below $37,500, and all of these will be doubled for married filing jointly, and add new graduated rates of 6% for income between $37,500 and $75,000 and 7% for income above $150,000, with the ability to use those lower rates phasing out for incomes over $200,000. We should limit deductions for higher income taxpayers, and to assist lower income Kentuckians, we should increase the standard deduction to $4,000 and pair it with an earned income tax credit, which Anna mentioned earlier. These changes will help revenue to grow as our economy grows, and they would raise over $600 million, hold the bottom 60% of Kentuckians harmless on average, ask the next 20% to chip in just $68 more a year, while requiring more of the wealthiest 20% who have received enormous state and federal tax cuts. As part of an overall progressive package of tax changes that asks more of the wealthy and large corporations, broadening the sales tax base is good tax policy. We should repeal exemptions for large trucks and boats and expand the sales tax to additional services such as storage, garment alteration, installation not related to the sale of goods, pool cleaning, photography, investment counseling, and interior decorating. In broadening the base, we need to keep in mind that some exclusions, like the ones for groceries and prescription drugs, should be maintained because they lessen the impact on people who are less wealthy. Our tax recommendations also include raising the corporate income tax rate commensurate with the new individual rate, scrutinizing corporate tax breaks, and getting rid of a couple like the film tax credit, getting rid of the property tax cap and a hugely costly tax breaks for hospitals, reinstating the estate tax, and regulating and taxing marijuana. And we should also make sure we stick to a responsible and reasonable pension payment schedule. I hope you'll look at our report to see the other options that we recommend. I also want to talk briefly about the road fund and the way to address challenges we face there. Under our Constitution, funds generated from taxes imposed on motor fuels or the operation and purchase of motor vehicles must be used only for road-related expenses. Unfortunately, road fund revenues experienced a drop in 2014 due to a reduction in the wholesale price of gas and a credit for trade-in vehicles, and that lost revenue has not been made up. The taxes that support the road fund need to be modernized. The motor fuels tax should be increased and indexed to growth in road construction costs. Additional fees should be collected on hybrid and electric vehicles, and fees associated with registering and licensing vehicles, which are low compared to other states, should be increased. As Sarah noted, we've fallen woefully behind in making critical investments in our roads and bridges because of insufficient funds. In short, we can't get something for nothing, and taxes are how we work together to create and grow our communities.
So that's what we have for you all today. We would love to answer some questions. We've got plenty of time. To ask a question, just simply go to the bottom left-hand side of your screen where there is some blue bubbles, chat bubbles. You click on that, and then you can type in your question to us. We'll give you a couple seconds to do that. We've got a note from a listener who saw recently that for every 100 families that need affordable housing, there are only 35 units available, pointing out that we really do need these economic changes to help our Commonwealth to grow. Well, we're not getting any questions.
It's all crystal clear.
It's all crystal clear, I guess. We can, you can feel free to email us at info@kypolicy.org. And then we also have on our website the full report. We do get a question coming in right now. Don't go anywhere, folks. To Pam, how much does the state get per gallon of gasoline in road fund taxes, and how much do we need to increase?
Well, the tax isn't really done in a per gallon way. And the increases, there are two primary taxes that make up the road fund: motor vehicle usage tax and then the tax on motor fuel. And as Sarah noted, we have very large shortfalls in our road fund, and the revenues have been flat now for several years while the expenses have gone up. But the gas tax formula is based on, or the gas tax is based on a formula that changes as the average wholesale price of changes. And the General Assembly did enact language that prevented that from declining any further a few years ago. But what happened is there were 2 cuts in a row, and they only made up the revenue from one of the cuts. And gas sales have been going down because cars are becoming more fuel efficient. And so that's the problem with that tax, and that's why we need to modernize it. And the idea would be to tie it to the cost of construction, because that's what it's used for.
Right, thank you. Another question to Jason. Are there any plans to introduce this to candidates running for state or federal office?
As a matter of fact, we are planning and on doing a tour of the state over the next couple of months, and talking to as many candidates who have filed to run for the state legislature. This is obviously geared toward the state policy as opposed to federal policy. So yes, we hope to have a robust discussion with folks who are involved in that about some of the ideas that we have about where we can go. The next step, of course, after November is we have a gubernatorial race next year. And we believe these are some of the ideas that should be considered and debated in that context, and certainly implemented by whoever is the next governor after next November. So yes, we're doing everything we can to try to get some of these ideas out there and see what folks think.
And a follow-up question to that, how do we get these policy proposals in front of legislators to encourage them to pursue appropriate legislative action?
Well, I think copies of the report and sharing the report with lawmakers, with your legislators is a great way to do so. And as mentioned earlier, it's available on our website. You see the hyperlink on your screen now. So we are sending that to them, but it would be even better to have their own constituents go to them with copies of this report, maybe specific ideas that they have, or to share with them. We have a short session coming up in 2019. Not a lot has been identified so far as being on the agenda, but I think that can be a place where some of these ideas or other good ideas people have can begin to be discussed and debated, especially as we get ready for the next budget session in 2020, where we fear there are going to be additional budget cuts to many of the things that we've talked about in this webinar, unless there's some more revenue on the table. And as I'm sure you all know, we've had a decade of budget cuts that set our investment back in so many of these important things, and we're not going to be able to turn the other direction until we find some new sources. And we think some of the ideas we laid out here are the best ways to go.
I would also add that good old-fashioned letters to the editor and op-eds are always a valuable use of your time if you're trying to get some of these ideas more into the public debate.
And social media, of course. Telling your friends and family about these ideas are anything that really speaks to you is a great way to spread the word. We work with a lot of organizations, community organizations that have done a lot of work on these issues as well, and getting involved with those organizations is also an excellent way to help to bring those to the forefront of the discussion. Another question on marijuana legalization and regulations, is that medical only, or is it medical and recreational?
So in this agenda, we're talking about going to recreational. The conversation has changed significantly around that. There are, as you probably know, there are about 9 states now that have implemented recreational marijuana. There's significantly more revenue to be gained from that. There are obviously a lot of questions to figure out in terms of how it's available, where it's available, what level the taxes are at. But there are also, we believe, important gains to be made in terms of the amount we spend in the criminal justice system on the penalties for recreational marijuana use that have been adding costs to our already out-of-control criminal justice system and other benefits associated with that. And it's something we need to have a serious conversation about in this state and begin that conversation now, as other states are already doing so.
Now I'm going to throw the next question to Anna. Much of what was presented will need additional funding. Does the tax changes need to be implemented before we tackle the other issues?
It's a great question, and we thought long and hard about the particular revenue proposals that we included in this report, along with all of the other policy ideas that would strengthen our Commonwealth. And those policy ideas, yes, they do cost, but they're an investment in our economy and our people. That's why taxes are collected, so that we can invest in our state. So yes, if we're going to pay for these investments, we need to raise the revenue for them. Though a number of them would also create savings in our state budget. So yeah, they go together, the revenue recommendations as well as the other policy areas.
And another question coming in. I'm going to throw this to Jason. Are you for or against using gaming to raise revenue?
Well, and we specifically discuss in the revenue portion of the report a little bit about gaming. Our analysis of the issue is that many of the states that have expanded casinos specifically in the last couple of decades have seen disappointing revenue results. There's an initial bump, but the revenue afterwards is slow growing, and states that do go with that as a revenue approach are within a few years scrambling to find new revenue sources to replace the lost revenue from eroding casinos. Everybody knows we lose money from the nearby casinos, and so that is one of the main arguments that proponents use. But it's really important for people to understand that the revenue bump from that would be short-term and short-lived, in the sense that we would need to find other options, including the more robust and sustainable options that we lay out in the report, especially modernizing and making a more progressive income tax. Having said that, we also point to the fact that we're already doing some gaming in Kentucky, gambling in Kentucky, in the form of instant racing, in the form of other kinds of gambling that we're not actually taxing at adequate rates. And so we can generate some new revenue. It's not a lot of new revenue, but some new revenue from just making sure that the gambling that's already happening and that's been growing, including soon to be open at places like Churchill Downs, that we're actually taxing that, and that will help generate a little bit of revenue. But we need to understand that in the long term, if we want sustainable sources of revenue that allow us to keep the important investments in education and other things that we value, we have to look at things outside of gambling, and particularly the core taxes that make up the vast majority of the revenues we collect, the income tax and the sales tax.
Could I circle back for just a second? This is Pam, and I wanted to the questioner about the road tax. You did ask what it was currently, and I didn't answer that part of your question. It's 26 cents when you add everything together per gallon for gasoline and 23 cents for diesel.
Thank you, Pam. All right. Well, that is the questions that have been submitted to us. That's the end of those questions. I'll stall for about one more minute if anybody else has more coming through. Oh, we have one coming through on email. Pam, doesn't the additional tax on electric and hybrid vehicles disincentivize buying these cleaner vehicles?
I think that states, those kinds of taxes are relatively new, and I don't know if there's any research on that or not. I do know that because they're more fuel efficient, that generally speaking, the fees that are charged are less than the amount that those drivers save in gas by a lot, but I really don't know.
All right, 2 more questions coming in. Keep them coming. Thank you, everybody. How might we work with organized labor to assist the unemployed, underemployed, incarcerated, and those that cannot find jobs due to many records?
I'll take that. So there are a lot of recommendations in the Job Quality and Economic Security section of the report that address this issue. So first of all, expanding expungement so that more people can have a clean record and have a better shot at getting a job is a really important way to help people have second chances in our economy and find economic security for themselves and their families. Along with that, we need to reduce incarceration, reduce charges for low-level nonviolent offenses so that those people aren't even incarcerated in the first place. Those are a couple really important examples. We need to modernize our unemployment insurance system so that more Kentucky workers can access it. We have a very low rate of people who actually get unemployment insurance, and we can do things like let people who are working part-time access unemployment insurance, or people who quit for reasons like domestic violence. We could also do something called work sharing, which a lot of states do, which is to provide unemployment insurance payments to workers who are in firms that instead of laying people off in a slow economy, they allow workers to share jobs and have fewer hours, so that would supplement their wages. Anything else that anybody in the group would add? Again, repealing right to work and reenacting prevailing wages are also ways to support our workers.
All right. And a questioner who is asking if we have any more information on how the North Dakota State Bank works.
So the notion North Dakota, and they have had a state bank for about 100 years, is that the state at any one time, and this is true in Kentucky, has about $1.5 billion on hand that it collects from the taxes and fees that come in, and that money is being drawn out at all times to pay employees, pay Medicaid payments, and other expenses. But there's about $1.5 billion in deposits that a state has, and in every state but North Dakota, there are private banks that hold those deposits and then are able to they pay back to the state, but they use that money for their own purposes, for their own lending, for their own profits, etc. In the case of North Dakota, the state operates its own bank, so it keeps its own deposits and then is able to use that to capitalize loans. And it partners with, as Sarah mentioned, it partners with community banks to make business loans. It provides low-interest student loans. It helps support infrastructure projects, etc. So it's basically taking the money we already have in the state and making sure that the money that can be made off of loans, first of all, the loans happen within Kentucky, and that the state itself benefits. In Kentucky, our main depository institution is J.P. Morgan Chase. So J.P. Morgan Chase is the one that is able to take advantage of and make money off those the uses of that capital, and we think Kentucky should be able to do so. In North Dakota, as Sarah mentioned, they're able to pay a dividend every year back to the general fund. So it is a source of revenue for the state of North Dakota to operate its own bank.
Got a really, really good question that came through, it's a really good question. I think there's we could talk a lot about it and hypothesize. So I'm going to throw it to anybody who wants to answer it. If only one or two of these changes could go through in the next General Assembly, which ones would have the biggest positive impact on Kentucky's future?
And I think that's a good, excellent question and a really hard question. And let me just say that we didn't design this with the notion of what can pass in the next 30-day legislative session. We're really trying to create a conversation about the kinds of policies that would make a real difference in the state. Having said that, I will say two things myself and then others can join in. One is that I think there is a conversation about criminal justice reform that has been happening for several years. In some cases we've been making steps forward, in some cases we've been making steps backwards, but it is something where there is some interest, and I think there's some possibility of doing something around that in 2019. The other thing I will say, and this gets to your question about what would make the most positive difference, as Anna mentioned, and as we've talked about throughout, there's a number of these things that cost money. And if we don't generate some new revenue, if we don't find some new revenue, you take a lot of these things completely off the list. And it's unlikely that in 2019, when the session's only 30 days long, that they will take up revenue in a big way. But in 2020, we will generate a new budget, we'll create a new budget, and that's a good opportunity, an important place where revenue absolutely has to be considered. Other folks?
This is actually, I would just second the importance of criminal justice reform, just how important that is. We've got, just today there was testimony at the Capitol about our jails and how there's just, we house a lot of people with felony convictions in our jails, and there's just not good programming, and we're not having good outcomes. And really our inmate population is at an all-time high, and a lot of people who have drug problems are end up incarcerated, and there are other ways to address those issues, certainly more effective ways to handle those issues that our state faces.
We're all looking at each other. And putting these policies together, we're all really excited about each of the things that we've put in here, and they're well researched and some really exciting ideas that could move our state forward. And I think it's hard to pick your favorite child. It is obviously it's political realities, and even the ability for a 30-day session to push much through is, I think you're right in noting that the one or two policies would be realistic for next session, but we like to think about these as holistic ideas that really work together. It's why we have this gears picture on the slide up in front of you, because all these pictures all of these ideas really work together to generate a better economy for all in Kentucky. Without seeing any other further questions, we really appreciate all y'all's time tonight and listening and watching this webinar. Feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. You can send any email at info@kypolicy.org, and then we'll get it to the appropriate policy person, or you can look us up at kypolicy.org online, and all of our information is available there as well. Thanks so much to y'all, and have a great night.